A winter in California in December is deceptive. Its clear blue skies and chilly breezes carry an undercurrent of unpredictability. For Laura Mitchell, 32, this winter brought not only changing weather but a deep sense of unease. Her life, on the surface, seemed perfect. A senior marketing executive in Silicon Valley, she had carved a successful career, owned a beautiful home, and shared a marriage with Jake Morgan, her husband of 7 years. But beneath the shiny facade, cracks were beginning to show. Jake, 35, was a tech entrepreneur whose startup had recently secured major funding. While his professional triumphs filled their bank account, they drained something far more important: time. Long nights at the office, endless meetings, and frequent travel had turned him into a ghost in their shared home. Their conversations, once vibrant and full of laughter, now revolved around mundane logistics: groceries, bills, and their increasingly rare dinners together. The distance between them wasn't just physical. Months ago, Laura had discovered a text message on Jake's phone. It wasn't incriminating, but its tone had made her uneasy. When she asked Jake about it, he brushed it off as work-related. Laura wanted to believe him, but a seed of doubt had taken root, growing quietly in the corners of her mind. A holiday party with tensions. The tension between them became painfully apparent at a holiday party Jake insisted they attend. The event, hosted by one of Jake's investors, was a glittering affair, packed with ambitious tech founders and their equally polished partners. Laura felt out of place, her usual confidence muted by the weight of their unspoken issues. Jake, meanwhile, thrived in the crowd. He moved from group to group with ease, shaking hands, laughing at half-meant jokes, and charming potential collaborators. Laura, left to navigate the room on her own, sipped her wine and observed him from afar. "Lara?" A deep, familiar voice broke through her thoughts. She turned and froze. Standing before her was Ryan Collins, her ex-boyfriend from college. His face had barely changed in the decades since they last saw each other. He still had the same confident smile, the same sharp blue eyes that had once made her feel like the center of the universe. "Ryan," she said, her voice catching. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Small world," Ryan replied, his smile widening. "I'm working with a law firm that consults for some of these startups. And you? How's life treating you?" They began to talk, their conversation flowing easily as they caught up on lost years. For a moment, Laura forgot her discomfort, forgot Jake's distance, and felt a flicker of who she used to be. A vibrant, carefree version of herself that had been buried under years of responsibility and routine. Jake's silent observations from across the room. Jake noticed the animated conversation between Laura and Ryan. He saw the way her posture relaxed, the way her laugh carried across the room. Something he hadn't heard in months. A pang of unease settled in his chest. When Laura returned to his side later that evening, Jake couldn't help but ask, "Who was that guy?" "Ryan," Laura replied casually. "We dated in college. It's been years since I've seen him." Jake nodded, his expression unreadable, but his mind raced with questions. A suspicious message. The tension between them lingered long after the party. A few days later, Laura received a text message from Ryan. "It was great seeing you. Let's catch up soon." "Coffee?" She stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the reply button. After a moment's hesitation, she typed back, "Sure, let me know when." Laura rationalized her response as harmless. It was just coffee, just catching up with an old friend. But deep down, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time: excitement. That evening, Jake came home earlier than usual. As they ate dinner in near silence, he finally broke the quiet. "Do you think we're okay?" he asked abruptly. Laura looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "I mean us," Jake said, his voice careful. "Do you feel like we're drifting apart?" Laura hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I think we've both been busy," she said finally. "Maybe we just need to make more time for each other." Jake nodded but didn't seem convinced. The call to action. A meeting that shouldn't have happened the next day. Laura met Ryan at a cozy cafe nestled on a quiet street. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and the soft hum of conversation created an inviting atmosphere. As they talked, Lara found herself opening up in ways she hadn't with Jake in months. She told Ryan about her career, her frustrations, and her doubts about her marriage. Ryan listened intently, his gaze never wavering. "You deserve to feel appreciated," Ryan said softly, his words lingering in the air. Lara's heart raced. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear that. When she returned home that evening, Jake noticed something different about her. She seemed lighter, more animated. He wanted to ask where she had been but stopped himself. Instead, he retreated to his study, where he stared at his computer screen, unable to focus. In his gut, Jake felt the first stirrings of suspicion. Building suspense over the following weeks, Lara and Jake's interactions grew more strained. Lara continued texting Ryan, their conversations becoming increasingly personal. Jake, sensing her emotional withdrawal, began paying closer attention. One evening, as Lara was in the shower, Jake noticed her phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. The name Ryan flashed across the screen. Jake's jaw tightened as he read the preview of the message. "I can't stop thinking about you." When Lara emerged from the bathroom, Jake was waiting for her, the phone in his hand. "Who is he, Lara?" Jake asked, his voice calm but cold. Lara's face drained of color. "It's not what you think," she said quickly. "Then what is it?" Jake demanded, his tone rising. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been lying to me." Shadows between them, the days following Jake's confrontation with Lara, were like walking a tightrope over an abyss. The tension in their home was palpable, a weight neither of them could ignore. Yet, rather than address it directly, they sidestepped the truth. Lara clung to her explanation that Ryan was just an old friend, while Jake chose to retreat into silence rather than force a confrontation that might shatter what little remained of their fragile connection. But beneath the surface, both of them were consumed by the same thought. How had they drifted so far apart? Ryan's influence. Lara's conversations with Ryan continued, albeit with a heightened sense of caution. She changed his name in her phone to Rita and kept her messages brief, but their connection deepened nonetheless. Ryan had a way of making her feel understood, and with every text or stolen phone call, Lara found herself questioning whether her marriage to Jake was salvageable. One afternoon, Ryan called her during a lunch break. "I've been thinking about you," he said, his voice warm and familiar. Lara hesitated. "Ryan, I don't think we should be talking like this." "Why not?" "You deserve to feel wanted, Lara. And I can tell you haven't felt that way in a long time." His words struck a nerve. She tried to ignore the guilt clawing at her chest as she whispered, "It's complicated." "Life's always complicated," Ryan replied. "But you can't keep living for other people, Lara. You need to think about what makes you happy." Lara hung up the phone, his words echoing in her mind. Jake's growing suspicion. Meanwhile, Jake's suspicions continued to grow. The distance between him and Lara was undeniable, and her evasiveness only fueled his unease. One evening, after Lara left her laptop open on the couch, Jake found himself staring at the screen, debating whether to snoop. He hesitated, the voice in his head scolding him for invading her privacy. But curiosity and fear won out. He opened her email and began scanning for anything unusual. At first, there was nothing: work memos, shopping receipts, newsletters. But then he found an email from Rita that didn't sit right. "Thinking about our last conversation. Can't wait to see you again." Jake's stomach twisted. He wasn't a fool. He knew Rita wasn't who she claimed to be. Confrontation averted. When Lara returned home that evening, Jake was waiting in the kitchen, a glass of whiskey in hand. "Long day?" he asked, his tone neutral. "Yeah," Lara replied, setting her purse down. "Lots of meetings." Jake studied her carefully, searching for signs of deception. "You've been working a lot lately." "I have," Lara said quickly, avoiding his gaze. Jake opened his mouth to confront her but stopped himself. He realized he didn't just want to accuse her, he wanted answers. And to get them, he needed to play his cards carefully. A fragile alliance in an effort to reconnect, Jake suggested they take a weekend trip to Napa Valley, a place they had visited during the early years of their marriage. Lara agreed reluctantly, uncertain whether the trip would bring them closer together or simply highlight how far apart they had drifted. The drive to Napa was filled with awkward silences and half-hearted attempts at conversation. Jake tried to reminisce about their earlier visits, but Lara's responses were curt, her mind clearly elsewhere. When they arrived at the vineyard where they had once shared a romantic dinner, Jake looked at her and said, "Do you remember this place?" Lara nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips.
Ido.
It was one of our first weekends away together. Jake took her hand, surprising her. "I miss those days, Lara. I miss us." For a moment, Lara felt the walls she had built around herself begin to crack. "I miss us too," she admitted softly. Ryan's interruption, but just as they began to reconnect, Ryan's presence loomed over them once again. While Lara was in the restroom at the vineyard, her phone buzzed on the table. Jake glanced at the screen and saw a message from Rita. "Hope you're having fun. Wish I were there with you." Jake's jaw clenched as anger and heartbreak collided within him. When Lara returned, she saw the look on his face and froze. "What's wrong?" she asked cautiously. Jake held up her phone. "Who's Rita, really?" Lara's breath caught. She knew the time for half-truths had passed. A painful revelation over the next hour, Lara confessed everything. Her conversations with Ryan, her feelings of loneliness, and her growing doubts about their marriage. "I never meant for it to go this far," Lara said, tears streaming down her face. I felt invisible, Jake. Like you didn't see me anymore." Jake's voice was thick with emotion. "And instead of telling me that, you turned to him?"
"I'm sorry," Lara whispered.
"I don't know how to fix this." Jake stood and walked to the window, staring out at the vineyard. After a long silence, he said, "I need time to think, Lara. I don't know if we can fix this either." Ryan's true intentions in the days that followed, Jake began piecing together more about Ryan. Using a contact in private security, he discovered that Ryan had a history of meddling in relationships. 2 years earlier, he had been involved in a similar situation with another married woman, which ended in a public scandal. When Jake confronted Lara with this information, she was stunned. "I didn't know," she said, her voice shaking. "I thought he was just being a friend." Jake shook his head. "Ryan isn't your friend, Lara. He's a manipulator, and you let him into our lives." A symbolic gesture determined to make amends, Lara cut off all contact with Ryan, blocking his number and deleting their conversations. She also began attending therapy, hoping to understand the choices that had led her to this point. One evening, she handed Jake a sealed envelope. "What's this?" he asked. "A letter," Lara said. "Everything I've been too afraid to say to you. Please read it when you're ready." Later that night, Jake sat alone in their bedroom, opening the envelope with trembling hands. In the letter, Lara poured out her heart, admitting her faults and expressing her love for Jake. She wrote about her fears of failure, her struggles with vulnerability, and her regret for betraying his trust. "I don't know if you can forgive me," the letter concluded, "but I hope you'll let me try to earn back what we've lost." Tears blurred Jake's vision as he folded the letter. For the first time, he saw not just Lara's mistakes but her humanity. The turning point the following morning, Jake made breakfast for the first time in months. When Lara walked into the kitchen, he handed her a cup of coffee and said, "I read your letter." "And?" Lara asked, her voice barely audible. "I think I'm ready to try," Jake said. "But we have to be honest with each other from now on. No more secrets." Lara nodded, hope flickering in her chest. No more secrets. The intrigue revealed as they began to rebuild their relationship. An unexpected piece of information surfaced. Ryan had been the one to send Jake the anonymous email with screenshots of their texts, hoping to drive a wedge between them. Jake confronted Ryan directly, meeting him in a public park. "Why?" Jake demanded. Ryan smirked. "Because I could. And because she deserves better than you." Jake's fists clenched, but he held his composure. "Stay away from my wife," he said coldly. We're done letting you control us. A renewed commitment armed with the truth, Jake and Lara recommitted to their marriage. They attended couples therapy, rebuilt their communication, and took deliberate steps to reconnect. One night, as they sat on the couch watching an old movie, Jake reached for Lara's hand. "We've been through hell," he said. "But we're still here," Lara replied, squeezing his hand. A brewing storm, the fragile peace Lara and Jake had started to build after Lara's confession seemed promising. But beneath the surface, both carried wounds that refused to heal. Jake was determined to forgive, but trust came harder. Lara, though committed to change, often felt like she was walking on eggshells. One evening, Jake returned home from work visibly agitated. He placed his briefcase on the counter and poured himself a drink without saying a word. "Rough day?" Lara asked, trying to sound casual. Jake hesitated, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "I ran into Ryan." Lara froze. "Where?" "At a networking event. He was there representing his firm," Jake replied. His tone was sharp, edged with something Lara couldn't quite place. Anger or fear, maybe both. "What happened?" Lara asked, her voice tight. "He made it clear he's not done," Jake said, setting the glass down harder than necessary. "He told me he's not giving up on you." Lara felt a wave of nausea. "Jake, I haven't spoken to him since I blocked him. You have to believe me." "I want to," Jake said, looking at her with weary eyes. "But it's hard when he's so determined to interfere." Ryan's escalation the next morning, Lara found an envelope slipped under their front door. Inside was a single photo of her and Ryan at the cafe weeks ago, accompanied by a handwritten note. "Still think you can forget me? I won't let you." Lara's hands shook as she read the note. Jake, coming down the stairs, saw her pale face and took the letter from her. His expression darkened as he read it. "That's it," Jake said, his voice firm. "We're going to the police." But when they showed the note to the local authorities, they were met with indifference. "Unless he makes a direct threat, there's not much we can do," the officer said. Defeated but not willing to let Ryan's actions go unanswered, Jake reached out to his private security contact, hiring them to monitor Ryan's activities. Lara, meanwhile, felt trapped, her past mistake looming over her like a shadow she couldn't escape. The breaking point: days later, Jake received an email from an anonymous address. Attached was a video of Lara and Ryan at the cafe, edited to make their interaction seem romantic. The email's subject line read, "You deserve the truth." Jake watched the video in silence, his heart pounding. The footage was damning, even though he knew it had been manipulated. The image of Lara leaning in to speak to Ryan, her expression warm, cut through him like a knife. When Lara found him in the study later that evening, Jake was uncharacteristically cold. "What's wrong?" she asked, sensing the shift immediately. Jake turned the laptop screen toward her. "Explain this." Lara's breath caught as she watched the video. "It's not what it looks like," she said quickly. "Ryan must have edited this to make it look worse." Jake's jaw tightened. "Why does he still have this much power over us?" "Over you." "He doesn't," Lara cried. "I blocked him. I've cut him out. What else do you want me to do? I want to know why you let it get this far in the first place," Jake said, his voice rising. "You opened the door, Lara, and now I'm the one paying for it." Lara's face crumpled. "I made a mistake, Jake. I was lonely, and I felt invisible. But I've been trying to fix it ever since. Why can't you see that?" Jake stared at her, his face a mix of hurt and anger. "Because every time I think we're moving forward, something like this pulls us back." A symbolic fight. Jake packed a bag and left that night, saying he needed space. For Lara, the silence that followed was suffocating. She spent days agonizing over whether he would come back, replaying their arguments in her mind and questioning every decision she had made. Jake, meanwhile, stayed at a hotel, grappling with his emotions. He reached out to Kevin, his best friend, who listened patiently before offering his advice. "Look, man," Kevin said, "you love her. I know you do. But you have to decide if that love is enough to survive this. Sometimes I'm not sure it is, Jake admitted. Then you need to find out, Kevin said. The unexpected intrigue. A week after Jake left, Lara received a call from his private security contact. We found something on Ryan, the voice on the other end said. What is it? Lara asked, her heart racing. He's been stalking you for longer than we thought. We traced his activity back months, before you even ran into him at the party. He knew you'd be there. The revelation was like a punch to the gut. Ryan's reappearance hadn't been a coincidence. It had been a calculated move. When Jake returned to the house that evening, Lara met him at the door with the new information. He planned this, Jake, she said, her voice trembling. He orchestrated the entire thing to come between us. Jake read the report in silence, his expression darkening with every word. Why would he go to these lengths? Because he's a manipulator, Lara said. And I fell for it for a moment. But I swear to you, Jake, I never wanted this to happen. The moment of truth. Jake looked at Lara, his eyes searching hers for any trace of dishonesty. Finally, he spoke. I need to know something, he said. If you could go back and change it. Never reply to his first text. Never meet him for coffee. Would you? Yes, Lara said without hesitation, tears streaming down her face. 1,000 times, yes. I hate what I've done to us, Jake. But I love you. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving that if you'll let me. Jake exhaled slowly, the weight of the past weeks pressing down on him. Then let's make a deal, he said. No more lies. No more secrets. From now on, we fight for this. Together. Lara nodded, her heart breaking and mending all at once. Together, she echoed. An unexpected twist as they began to rebuild. Jake's private security team uncovered one final piece of information. Ryan had been leaking the emails and videos to multiple parties, hoping to ruin not only Lara's reputation but Jake's career. Armed with this evidence, Jake and Lara filed a restraining order against Ryan and warned his firm of his actions. Ryan's influence crumbled under the weight of his own schemes, leaving Jake and Lara to focus on their future without his interference. A renewed commitment. The next morning, Jake surprised Lara with breakfast in bed. A small gesture, but one that spoke volumes. We've been through hell, he said, sitting beside her. But we made it, Lara replied, taking his hand. Their love wasn't perfect, but it was resilient. And for the first time in a long time, they felt ready to face whatever came next. Together. Picking up the pieces. The days following Ryan's exposure felt like stepping into a new chapter for Lara and Jake. The restraining order against Ryan was in place, and his firm had quietly let him go after the scandal came to light. For the first time in months, the constant undercurrent of fear and tension in their lives seemed to dissipate. But while Ryan was out of the picture, the damage he had caused lingered. Lara and Jake sat together in their living room one evening, the faint hum of a movie playing in the background. Jake turned to Lara, breaking the comfortable silence. We've been through so much, he said softly. And I know we're finally past the worst of it, but sometimes it feels like there's still this space between us. Lara looked at him, guilt flashing across her face. I know, and I think it's because we haven't really talked about everything. Not completely. Jake nodded. I think we need to. If we're going to truly move forward, we have to face everything we've been avoiding. Unpacking the past. The next day, they set aside time to talk, really talk, for the first time in what felt like years. They went for a walk along the beach, a place that had always been special to them during the early days of their relationship. The sound of waves crashing against the shore provided a soothing backdrop to their conversation. Lara began. Jake, I need you to know that what happened with Ryan was never about you. It was about me, about how I felt like I wasn't enough. Not just for you, but for myself. Jake stopped walking, turning to her. Why didn't you tell me you felt that way? Because I was scared, Lara admitted. Scared that if I said it out loud, it would make it real. Scared that you'd look at me differently. Jake exhaled slowly, his gaze softening. I wish you'd told me.
Iwishide nutisa suone.
But the truth is, I haven't been perfect either. I threw myself into work, thinking I was doing it for us. But I wasn't there for you when you needed me. They continued walking, their conversation flowing more easily as they shared their fears, regrets, and hopes. For the first time in months, they felt like partners again. A symbol of new beginnings that evening, Jake surprised Lara with a small box. Inside was a simple bracelet made of woven leather and silver. "It's not much," Jake said, a bit sheepishly, "but I wanted to give you something to remind us of this moment, of starting over." Lara smiled, tears brimming in her eyes as she fastened the bracelet around her wrist. "It's perfect," she whispered. The bracelet became a symbol of their renewed commitment, a tangible reminder of the work they were putting into their marriage. A revelation that changes everything. Weeks later, as life began to settle into a new rhythm, Jake received a call from his private investigator. The investigator had continued looking into Ryan, curious about the extent of his actions. What he uncovered left Jake stunned. "Ryan didn't just manipulate Lara," the investigator said. "He was targeting you both. It turns out he was hired by someone to sabotage your marriage." Jake's heart raced. Hired? By who? The emails and anonymous messages were traced back to an old colleague of yours, Ethan Green. Jake's stomach dropped. Ethan Green was a competitor from the tech world, someone Jake had clashed with over a major deal years ago. The revelation hit him like a punch to the gut. "That bastard," Jake muttered. "He did all of this just to undermine me." The puzzle comes together. Jake shared the news with Lara that evening, and together, they pieced together the larger story. Ethan had hired Ryan to exploit Lara's vulnerability, knowing it would create chaos in Jake's personal life. The goal was to distract Jake from his work, weaken his reputation, and ultimately give Ethan an edge in their industry. "I can't believe someone would go to such lengths," Lara said, her voice shaking with anger. "To destroy our lives over business?" Jake nodded grimly. "It's sick, but it makes sense now. Why Ryan seemed so calculated. Why he kept pushing even when you tried to end things." Lara reached for Jake's hand. "We can't let this define us. We've already been through so much. We're stronger than this." Jake squeezed her hand. "We are. And now we know the truth." Confronting the enemy armed with the evidence, Jake contacted his lawyer and prepared to confront Ethan. While he wanted to handle things legally, there was a part of him that craved a more direct confrontation. Lara, sensing his anger, urged him to stay calm. "You're better than him, Jake," she said. "Don't let his actions pull you down to his level." Jake nodded, taking her words to heart. A week later, he met Ethan in a conference room, accompanied by his lawyer and the private investigator. The confrontation was tense, but Jake remained composed as he presented the evidence. Ethan's smug demeanor quickly crumbled as the weight of his actions became clear. Jake didn't press charges, but he made it clear that any further interference would result in severe legal consequences. As Jake walked out of the room, he felt a sense of closure. For the first time in months, the storm that had upended his life seemed to have passed. The final test, despite the resolution with Ethan and Ryan, Jake and Lara knew their journey wasn't over. Trust was something that had to be rebuilt brick by brick, and they were determined to do the work. They continued therapy, learning how to communicate more openly and effectively. They set aside time each week to connect, whether it was a quiet dinner at home, a hike in the hills, or simply sitting together and talking about their day. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Jake turned to Lara. "Do you ever think about how close we came to losing this?" he asked. "Every day," Lara admitted. "But I also think about how far we've come." Jake smiled. "Me too. And I'm proud of us." A lesson for life. As their marriage strengthened, Jake and Lara realized that their experience had taught them invaluable lessons, not just about each other, but about themselves. For Lara, it was the importance of confronting her fears and being honest about her needs. She learned that vulnerability wasn't a weakness but a strength, and that true connection required openness and trust. For Jake, it was a wake-up call to be more present and attentive. He realized that success at work meant little if it came at the expense of the people he loved most. Together, they learned that love wasn't about perfection. It was about resilience, the willingness to fight for each other even when things felt broken. The intrigue's final piece months later, as they were going through old files in their home office, Laura stumbled upon a journal she had kept during the early years of their marriage. Flipping through its pages, she found an entry that made her smile. "Jake and I had our first fight today," the entry read. "It was silly, about something small, but it reminded me that love isn't always easy. It's messy and imperfect, but it's ours, and I wouldn't trade it for anything." Laura showed the entry to Jake, and they both laughed. The words, written years ago, felt truer than ever. A hopeful future. Jake and Lara's journey wasn't about achieving a perfect marriage. It was about building a stronger one. They knew there would be more challenges ahead, but they also knew they were equipped to face them together. On their anniversary, Jake surprised Lara with a weekend trip to the same vineyard where they had once almost lost each other. As they stood among the vines, holding hands, Jake whispered, "Here's to us, the imperfect, the messy, and the beautiful." Lara smiled, tears in her eyes. "To us." The moral, the story of Jake and Lara is a testament to the power of resilience, honesty, and forgiveness. It's a reminder that love isn't about never making mistakes. It's about learning from them, growing together, and choosing each other, even when it's hard. For anyone listening, the message is clear. Life will test you, relationships will challenge you, but it's in the trials that we discover what truly matters and who is worth fighting for.